Greetings, students, and welcome to the presentation on the Sui and Tang dynasties. Here are the two essential questions. How can the Sui and Tang dynasties be compared to the Qin and Han dynasties? And can you describe the basic characteristics of the Tang dynasty? In China, from the 5th to 3rd centuries BCE, was a period referred to as the Warring States. This was an era of chaos with little evidence of strong central government. This era was followed by the brief but significant rule of the Qin dynasty under Shi Huangdi. China was forcefully unified under repressive circumstances, but it was an era of robust consolidation and infrastructure growth. The Qin was followed by the long rule of the Han from 206 BCE to 220 CE. The Han were more benevolent to the citizens of China. It was a time of territorial expansion, prosperity, and cultural and economic exchanges with the outside world. This pattern would be repeated in the wake of the Han dynasty. A period of disunity would be followed by a brief and repressive regime, which would be replaced by a more inclusive rule that would sponsor prosperity. This regime would also exhibit more longevity. China experienced a time of darkness after the fall of the Han dynasty, which fell in 220. From that time up to 581, it was similar to the Warring States period. There wasn't a strong central government, and local warlords battled for turf. The Qin dynasty, which followed the Warring States, lasted for only 15 years. The Sui dynasty, which followed the dark period after the fall of the Han, only lasted for 35. Amazingly, beginning in 581, the Sui rebuilt the ostentatious public works projects of Shi Huangdi and the Qin. The Grand Canal, which linked the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers, and the Great Wall, which protected China from northern nomadic incursions. Unfortunately, the burden of these massive public projects was significant, both in terms of taxation and in terms of the human toll of forced labor. As many Chinese grew increasingly negative about these obligations, the Sui government responded by harshly quashing any dissent. After only 3 decades, the Sui was destroyed by popular revolt. Just as the Qin disintegrated rapidly and then was quickly replaced with the Han, the Sui fell in 615, and by 618 the Tang dynasty had assumed power. The next 3 centuries would be an era of relative peace, prosperity, and expanded international intercourse. In response to the paranoid and obsessive centralization efforts of the Sui, the Tang will create a brand of Chinese federalism. Power was dispersed. Provinces were given much autonomy in exchange for fiscal tribute to the central government. This proved popular after the burdensome rule of the Sui. Much like their Han ancestors, the Tang would build off the efforts of the preceding regime. The Tang would exploit the Grand Canal as an economic artery for commerce. This vital transportation network would not only enhance the exchange of products between North and South, but would also foster a unification of the nation, which is essential to any federalist scenario. Expanded commerce inspired exports both via the Silk Road and the ocean routes to the south. This trade heavily favored exports such as silk. This favorable trade imbalance greatly enhanced the coffers of the Tang dynasty. The Tang capital of Chang'an became an international hub. Foreign merchants and evangelists flocked to the city, where one could observe diversity in the form of Buddhist temples and later Muslim mosques. By the 9th and 10th century, the Tang dynasty went into steep decline. The burden of maintaining prosperity and defending the trade routes such as the Silk Road against an evolving adversary which was Tibet, and traditional adversaries such as northern nomads soon exhausted the Tang. An interesting byproduct of this decline was a xenophobic reaction to Buddhism. Buddhism had been seen by many officials in the Tang dynasty as dissolving the very glue that held Chinese civilization together, the family. By this time, however, Buddhism had made solid inroads into Chinese society. This hostility amongst some traditional Confucian Chinese to the spiritual threat of Buddhism would lead to a polarization of Tang China that would greatly hasten its decline in the early 10th century.